Hello and welcome to another episode of Anxiety Diaries, a weekly podcast about mental health, incredible people, and so much more. Today's episode is going to feature a really good conversation with a really good person. And we're going to touch on a lot of different subjects. We're going to talk about mental health, how you can recognize a mental health issue in yourself, how important it is to get help as soon as possible, how your family deals with it, and how you deal with it in front of your family, and how you can thrive despite feeling uncomfortable sometimes and feeling depressed and feeling like things aren't so great. You can survive, you can thrive, and you can live a happy life if you do the right things. It's a really good conversation. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I am by no means a medical professional, nor are many of the guests you'll hear on the podcast. If you need help, please seek qualified medical attention. This podcast, while informative and fun, is no substitute for the real thing. With all that said, take a deep breath and relax. Here we go. Today on the podcast, we have Joel Keller. Joel is a journalist and has been for quite some time now. He's been a freelance writer for over a decade. He's written for the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Decider.com, Parade.com, so many other places. He's written about TV. He's written about becoming a dad. His articles on the Motherload blog on the NewYorkTimes.com were widely read and really, really interesting pieces. And he's here to talk to us today about something he's dealt with for many years. I've known Joel now for quite a long time, and I had no idea. So it led to a really, really interesting conversation. So without further ado, here's Joel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be here.
I'm really excited to have you here. I've known you for quite a long time in many capacities, but this is what's really interesting to me. I got to know you through your writing. You've written for a ton of different places and written a lot of good stuff. Mm-hmm. But I never knew. When I first started this podcast, you were one of the first people that came to me and told me, this is such a good idea for a podcast. You know, I'm really excited that you're doing it, and I'd love to come on and talk. And I was like, what do you got to talk about?
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting subject for me, and I know that the listeners will appreciate this as well, because I would never have known that you have dealt with a mental health issue in your lifetime. So please take a couple minutes and tell the audience a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, it's probably because I put it up such a brave front online, right? That's kind of how, yeah, it just seems like I'm living the happiest lifestyle I possibly could. The other thing you got to know about me is that Scott and I live 2 towns away from each other, and we've never met in person.
That's correct.
So there we go.
Good old anxiety.
Yeah, a little bit of that. So, yeah, I have been dealing with mental health issues for quite a long time. I've always been kind of an anxious kid. You know, one of those kids who kind of growing up, you know, you get the usual bullying, the usual, you know, people talking about you because you're different, that kind of thing.
Sure.
I've always, you know, it's been tough to deal with, and there's some family issues that are involved there too, which we can get into at some point. But, you know, when I was in my 20s, I had finally left the nest and lived on my own. It really did hit me that, wow, okay, I've got the rest of my life in front of me. And I was working my first job out of college, and it just felt like a day after day grind. And even when I was 24, 25 years old, I was sitting there going, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what I do.
What were you doing then?
My first job out of college, I went to Stevens Institute of Technology for computer engineering, which is interesting because now I'm a journalist. I write about TV. So it felt a lot of good that degree did.
Money well spent.
Money well spent. Well, it's some of my money, but mostly my parents' money. My first job was with Dun & Bradstreet, the credit checking company. And basically I didn't want to program. A lot of the job offers I was getting was for coding, which to me I thought was deadly dull, and I didn't have the patience for. So I was your desk side support person. You called me to install Microsoft Office on your computer. You called me to, or you called my help desk if you couldn't get on the network. You called me to install a new computer. You called me to, if you spilled coffee all over your keyboard. You know, there were a couple of incidences in 1 week where we got tickets for vibrations by the computer or on the desk, and both times I opened the drawer and there was a pager in there. And for the kids, a pager was a device where people would call a phone number and it would vibrate or beep, and then you would actually have to go to a separate phone and call that person back.
I recently found my pager from when I was younger, and I showed it to my daughter. She's 9, and she was like, "What is this, Daddy?" So I showed her how it beeps and beeps, and now she gets to play with it.
Right, and it's like it's an antique.
Yeah.
Unless you're, I think, a doctor. I think a doctor. I don't even think drug dealers use them anymore. I think it's stock. Anyway, so so it was a bit of a boring job, and it's that kind of started the thought in my mind, like, well, this is it. And it was a number of years doing that, thinking like, okay. And I was single and really didn't have much in the way of prospects to get into a relationship. Even though I was still kind of an awkward young guy, didn't really know how to deal with people. College helped a little bit, but it was still very awkward. Didn't really know what I was doing most of the time. And I don't know how many 20-something people know what they're doing socially at all anyway.
Right.
So I switched jobs, I do this. And at a certain point, it all came to a head, somewhere around when I was 27 or so years old. So about 20 years ago. I had gotten a bad performance evaluation. It was right around Christmas time. I was in love with one of my coworkers, even though she was married or about to be married, engaged. Yeah, it was. And I barely had dated anybody. I was starting to break out on my own. I had traveled internationally for the first time. I went to England, but I was miserable a lot of that time. And I was just miserable. And I walked and I felt like I had no one. And around Christmas time, I walked up to the cafeteria and there were these families there doing the Christmas party with everybody sitting on Santa Claus's lap, and which is weird because I'm Jewish, so you would think I wouldn't care about that. But and then it just got me to the point where I'm like, I just kind of I didn't break down, but I was like, I need some help.
Yeah.
So I got therapy. I started getting therapy the following year. So I've probably been doing therapy on and off for almost 20 years. And, at a certain point, I always knew, like, I had always thought about one of the other things about me that was interesting that I always thought was just a normal thing that I found out later that it really wasn't, was I thought about death a lot, what death was like, what happened after death, even something weird like, and I've even thought about this these days. It's like, wow, when you see somebody wearing certain clothes, like, oh, what clothes do you want to wear when you die? Weird stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right. And it would just be a background thought. It would be a thought that would come to me. I'd shiver and then it would go away. But in the midst of my therapy, and this was we're at this point, and I'm fast forwarding a lot, but this is January of 2001. I had been traveling internationally a bit. My friend and I were in Egypt. So this is about 9 months before 9/11. We're in Egypt. We're in Luxor at the Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at this temple, the Temple of put, I think it's called. And we knew that a few years before that, there had been a terrorist attack where a bunch of German tourists were pulled out of a bus and shot right there at the temple. And I thought, I'm like, oh, so if I died here, I'd be all the way on the other side of the world, and my parents would have to come to Egypt to come get me. And I was just like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. That is so scary to think about.
Yeah. I'm getting chills just thinking about it now.
Exactly. And my friend who is an emergency room physician, he's like, oh, dude, so you die, you know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And I'm like, how can you be so cavalier about this stuff, right?
Right.
So a few months later, this is around this time in 2001, around April, I am at my grandmother's apartment. She lived in the Bronx. She at that point was in her mid 80s. You know, on a slow decline, but she passed away a few years later. I was with my brother and sister-in-law, and they just had their first child in December of 2000. So she'll be 18 in November, December. She'll be 18, which blows my mind.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know my brother, so you know that was the first of a number of them. So we're there in my grandmother's apartment, and I'm looking at a picture of a bunch of family members. I don't know if it was at a wedding or at a bar mitzvah. It was a black and white picture. It looked like it was around the early 60s. And I'm looking, and I'm like, oh my God, this person's dead. 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 Like 3/4 of the people in that picture were dead. So I'm there, and my brother and sister-in-law are there, and my baby niece is there, and I'm talking to my baby niece, and so at the time I'm 29, a few months away from about a month or so away from hitting 30. I'm sure that didn't help. My parents were in 60, 61, something like that at the time. So I said to my niece, I said, do you know that when you're my age now, I'm going to be your grandma and grandpa's age? And then I envisioned myself sitting around my house like my mom and dad did, you know, hating life, which for various family issues we can get into a little bit later is because of that way. And then all of a sudden, this cloud just came over me, and like all of a sudden my back started hurting, and I started like getting shivers, and that was literally a meltdown, literally a breakdown, and a panic attack. My heart started pounding, my back started hurting, and I realized that it wasn't momentary. I tried to I went to sleep. I woke up the next day. My heart was still pounding.
Right.
My back hurt. My shoulders hurt. Everything felt dark. I didn't want to get out of bed. And that continued on for weeks. I didn't want to get out of bed. I got up and went to work at this job that I hated in the middle of Newark. And I just sat there like a zombie staring at my laptop, right? To the point where my boss is like, "Are you sad?" You know, and I tried to put on a good face, but it was this weird feeling in that everything was just dark and everything was dull and everything was
general malaise.
Yeah, and just like not worth, and things were not worth dealing with. So as soon as I came back from work, I went to bed.
Yeah.
You know, all I did was I spent that month, unless I was going to work and maybe a couple of isolated other incidents, other isolated days, I spent it in bed.
Were you still having panic attacks, or was it more depression?
It was depression with panic.
Gotcha.
Because my heart would still pound. Right. I remember sitting at a cafe calling my therapist, who that week happened to be on vacation, so we had a substitute. So I was calling the substitute therapist. And my heart, I just remember feeling my heart pounding in my chest as I was talking to the guy on the phone at the cafe next to my work.
Right.
And him telling me that this is normal, just kind of try to make your way through it. And, if you need to come in and talk to me, or if you're okay, wait until your therapist comes back, that's fine. But I just remember being like, just sitting in the corner at this cafe and being like, I can't, I don't want to get out of bed. My heart's pounding. What's going on?
Yeah.
And so that went on for, good. It wasn't a long time. It was probably a month,
Right. Did you immediately go and see your therapist when they got back?
Yeah. When he got back, I saw him. It was a weird time. It was a weird time because there were only a couple of times where I felt like I had come out of it and I felt like myself. I felt lighter. I felt like I can, like one time I was at work and I was chatting with everybody and I felt like, oh, I feel better. And then I went right back into it.
Yeah.
And then there was another day where I had been scheduled a house concert by Pat Denizio, the late Pat Denizio, the Smithereens was doing house concerts. And I had been planning this for a long time and it was taking time. There was like 3 or 4 iterations of it, and then ended up being in my apartment with 5 people. And it was great. And it was a great day and I felt great. And then as soon as everybody left, crashed back down again.
Yeah.
So it was weird. It was weird. I was like, well, why am I not coming out of this? What I think finally brought me out, believe it or not, was just on a goof. I had signed up for improv classes months before at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York, and started taking them. And it was a level 1 class, and I think the challenge and the getting out of my comfort zone and having to be with people and having to open yourself up actually really helped. And that's what started bringing me out.
That's really interesting because most people would be terrified of doing that. And here it was saving you.
I think it was because I wanted to do something else. It was part of my desire, like, to be like, well, is this it? This is all I'm doing with my life. Let's see what else I can do.
Yeah.
So that's why I still wanted to do the class, because even though maybe I was still down and still depressed, I was still like, let's keep trying. Let's try this.
Yeah.
I'll go one, see what happens. Something like that. And
take a chance.
Yeah, take a chance. And, it's not like I was doing, I had to make an effort. I had to go into New York. I was living in suburban New Jersey like I am now. I had to go into New York, take the train, go downtown, go into a place where I didn't know anybody. And
then perform improv.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy, man. Were you sweating it the first, class or so?
I think so. I think we're talking about 17 years ago now, so it's hard to remember. But there were times when I felt like, what am I doing here?
Right.
Because these are people who want to be actors, and I'm just this schmuck who has an IT job who's just doing this for fun.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to find like some improv sports in suburban New Jersey that everybody just has something else to do, I decided to go hardcore.
Right, to the biggest improv company.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you know what? Yeah. Maybe it was a form of extreme like exposure therapy. You faced a bit of a fear, and you came out on top. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And when we did our level 1 performance, it was really great. It was like a very exhilarating feeling, because we also did well, and a bunch of my friends showed up, and then we went out for drinks after, and it was really a lot of fun. But by then, by the time the course had ended and we were doing that graduation performance, I had come out of whatever I was feeling.
Right.
Was I feeling 100% better? No, but I also wasn't
in the deep.
Right. And the cloud had lifted. I was getting out of bed.
Yeah.
I wasn't,
Well, you had something to look forward to. And I think this is something that is one of the reasons that I love writing and love what I do, is because you always have that like final product. Writing sucks, right? Writing is really, really hard. I hate writing, but I love having written. So
Yeah.
you always have that, like, you get that instant high from having something published. Or for you, this was this high from going and performing and doing something you really wanted to do.
Yeah, it was basically so not what I had been to that point in my life. I had written when I was younger. Uh, so there was some creative streak to me, but it had been so ground down, by my dad who wanted me to be an engineer, by college, where if you go to an engineering school, even though you take humanities classes, you're so ground down by the process of just trying to get through these classes and get a halfway decent grade and graduate. And on top of that, drinking and, going out for late night White Castle and all sorts of things you do when you're in college. The creative part of it got kind of ground out of me, and it took a number of years for it to come back out. But I will say this, and I also, my 30th birthday, just like with everybody else, was probably a factor, but it also led me to be much more peaceful about turning 30.
Yeah.
When my birthday actually came around, a few months later, where I was like, all right, well, I've been through some pretty bad shit, and my brain's attacked me, and so what else can be that bad? Little did I know at the time. See, I think at the time I was like, okay, well, I'm going through therapy. I went through this, and probably one of the other reasons why I got so depressed, even though had been doing therapy for a couple of years, because a lot of stuff was coming out.
Right.
So that also
You were
probably
finally facing all the things that were kind of lying dormant for all these years.
Right. So, but little did I know that at a certain point, I thought, okay, I feel better. Okay. So what if I'm still thinking about worst case scenarios, or I still have anxiety about doing certain things, or I'm still thinking about what happens after you die. I'm not depressed. I'm not depressed anymore. That's what I used to think.
Yeah.
And that went on for a long time. But during this whole time, I changed careers. I became a journalist. I started dating more, which is a journey in and of itself. I basically spent the whole time, I was busy just trying to improve and change and grow. So I couldn't really stop and think about why I was still feeling some of the things I was feeling. I was just like, well, at least I'm okay. I'm getting out of bed. I'm doing some fun things. I'm going out. I'm writing. I'm meeting new people. I'm dating. How bad could this be? Right. I think it took meeting my current wife and then moving in with her, to realize that I think, and it still took me a few years, even after I was kind of told that I was depressed still, to realize that depression isn't always about just lying in bed and not wanting to get out, or there being a big cloud over your head, or, depression comes in a lot of different forms.
Right. And it's not something you're ever going to get rid of completely.
No.
There's no linear line to, being better. It's all wiggly all over the place.
Right. And you can feel better, and you can feel like, oh, this is your standard way of living, until you really realize, like, oh, this is not the way people think. This is not the way people operate.
Sure, you're going to have a depression your whole life. That's what it is. But you can live with depression and still live a fulfilled, happy life.
Exactly. And a person that was very, and you may or may not be surprised at the person that actually made me start really thinking about this, this kind of this idea of low level depression, is Will Wheaton, because he's actually been very public about the fact that he has low level depression. And I'd say about 5 years or so ago, I was reading a blog post they did, or a story they did, and he was talking about the fact that he woke up every day feeling this dread, or feeling anxious, or feeling something, and he thought that's the way he always operated, and that was just life. That's just life. I think at a certain point it just got to him to the point where it's like, this is not normal. Or maybe his wife told him or something where he just realized, oh, maybe this isn't just the way I operate. And he went and went to an actual psychiatrist, a medical doctor, got medication, and realized that things were better.
Yeah.
It's not that he went happy-go-lucky, but things were better.
Right. He could learn to deal with it in a better way.
Right. And I thought about it, and I had, I had not suffered that kind of crushing, don't want to get out of bed depression for over a decade at that point. But I was like, well, but why am I still thinking about death all the time? Why am I still thinking about worst case scenarios a lot? Why am I still having issues like kind of being out socially with people sometimes? So I had never to that point considered medication. I had never at that point considered going to an actual medical doctor, psychiatrist. But at a certain point, I was driving my wife crazy. She had, for a number of years, had said that, at times I seemed depressed. So at one point, I just said, you know what, I need to go to an actual psychiatrist and talk to him.
Yeah.
And this was, I'd say, about 4 or 5 years ago. And I talked to him, and he diagnosed me with low-level depression. I know there's a medical term for it, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But and prescribed me medication, and it's been better since.
Right.
Are my emotions flattened? No. I'm not happy-go-lucky. I still complain a lot. But the bad thoughts, the thoughts of dread, the thoughts of death, the dark stuff isn't as dark,
right,
as it used to be.
There's a little light now.
Yeah, and I think it's not as nihilistic. My existence, I can cope with changes better. I can cope with a lot of stuff going on better, and I think that's where it helped. But I didn't know that kind of thing existed until a few years ago. I don't know about you, but I didn't know that kind of way of being existed.
Yeah, like a high functioning depression.
Right. Where, I had heard about people who said that they were clinically depressed, but they still functioned. And I didn't think I was that. But it was definitely something where my brain chemistry wasn't letting me fully function to the degree I needed to function. Because of bad thoughts getting in my head, because of anxiety. It ended up being a good thing. I think January 1st of, I think, of 2015 maybe, or 2014. Now, I don't even remember. It's when I took my first, I had held on to the medication for a month or two because I wasn't sure. And on January 1st, I took my first one. And, obviously it took a couple of weeks.
Yep.
But I felt it. I felt better. Those thoughts were starting to fade. And when they did come, they weren't as intense. They didn't last as long. It definitely made me believe in that diagnosis and doing what you have to do to treat it, and if that includes medication, includes medication.
Yeah. What do you think you'd be at right now if you hadn't gone out and got help right away? I mean, you'd already been talking to a therapist for many years.
Right.
If that wasn't the case, where do you think you'd be now?
Oh, now? I'd probably be dead. Because it had become
unmanageable.
It had become unmanageable. I was very sad about my life when I first started getting therapy. And what's interesting was a lot of the stuff that would have a lot of life stuff hadn't happened to me yet.
Right.
There was stuff from my childhood, which was traumatizing, but it didn't really fully hit me how traumatizing it was until I started doing therapy. But as an adult, a lot of life stuff hadn't happened to me yet. I was very immature.
Right.
Being in love with the coworker that liked me as a friend and hung out with me, but was never going to drop her fiance for me.
Right.
That kind of thing.
But it all works out.
Right. Oh, but it all works out. But what I'm saying is that a lot of life stuff hadn't happened to me yet.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't recognized back then that I needed help,
Yep.
started on that path, I'd either be dead or I would be divorced and divorced and struggling.
Yep.
I would have found someone, married them, completely screwed it up, divorced. I would have been struggling, if not dead.
Yeah.
Because there was too much stuff thrown at me in the years after that, relationship and marriage, which is a happy thing, but it's still a change. My dad passing away, adopting a child, all that life stuff that happens to you as you get into your 30s and 40s, job, career ups and downs.
Yep.
None of that stuff, if I hadn't identified 20 years ago when I was 27 years old that I need some help, I don't know if I would have handled it at all. I don't know if I would have even gotten to the point to be able to handle some of that.
Yeah. It's a real testament to, reaching out as soon as you can.
Yeah. And even then, it's still a zigzag.
Yep.
You think you're better, and then your life changes and things come up to remind you in a different way of certain things, and that you need help in a different way.
Yep.
You run up against a wall in one way of treatment, and you're like, okay, now I need it a different way. It's not like I've gone to the same therapist for 20 years. You know what I mean? And I haven't done therapy every month for the last 20 years. It's always been on and off when I've needed it. And one thing I've learned is that you don't just go to the same therapist all the time, because you have different needs at different times.
Yep.
Sometimes you need behavioral therapy because you need to figure out how you react to something and change it. Sometimes you need family therapy because you have to deal with family issues that you still haven't processed yet,
Yep.
whether it's current family issues or past family issues. Sometimes you need a doctor, like an actual medical doctor who prescribes medication.
Yep.
This is what I found out, that it's not just sitting there talking to someone and making yourself feel better and having him or her give you feedback. You need different things at different times.
Yeah, there are many different paths to feeling better.
Yeah, and it's continuous.
Yep.
Anyone who says, well, I went to therapy and now I'm better, I tend to not believe them.
It's tough. I mean, listen, there are people that sometimes maybe they just need something to kick them back into what they were before, or, to kick something out, take the edge off. But for the most part, for most people dealing with mental health issues, it's going to be something that they deal with their whole life. It's just how do you deal with it in the most effective way? Yeah,
it's an ongoing thing, and it's just one of those things where it takes a long time to acknowledge that this is it's kind of like diabetes or MS or one of those things where you have to maintain it as opposed to cure it.
Right.
Mental illness, and I think this is something that's coming to the fore now with public people like
The Rock, Mariah Carey,
Will Wheaton, Selena Gomez, right?
Yep.
She's one of them. Yeah, coming to the fore, saying, with their various mental health issues, it could be depression, it could be bipolar disorder, it could be anxiety, but they're all saying that they're all talking about it not like I had it once and I'm better.
Right.
They're now saying I have it. At various times I haven't dealt with it, but now I'm dealing with it. Now I'm coming out with it to help other people.
Yeah, it's very important. They're all speaking in the present tense. And
Right.
I think that's something that gets overlooked very quickly. It's really astute that you point that out. They're all speaking about it in a way that saying, this is part of me,
Right.
And that's okay.
It's literally like MS or diabetes or, something that you have to maintain to stay healthy, and something that, there are times where you're going to feel worse than others. And that's okay, as long as you either know methods to make yourself feel better, or you can seek out help to make yourself feel better. And I think it goes to a lot of just the way mental health was stigmatized prior to the last, say, even 5 years. it takes a long time for people with mental health issues to realize that it's not just momentary.
Yeah. I think it's getting better, though. There's the knowledge out there is getting better. There's more people speaking up.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. This is something that I worry about a lot. You have this beautiful little daughter. You wrote about kind of your journey to becoming a dad on the New York Times Motherload blog a couple times. And this is something that really I think about all the time is, how is what I'm dealing with affecting my kid? Is that something you worry about with your daughter?
All the time. I mean, first of all, I'm very much a less nature, more nurture, probably because of what I went through in my childhood. I'm not saying that you become a good or bad person because of how your parents act, but there's definitely an effect. If my daughter was inclined to be a bit neurotic, maybe just naturally living with me might make her more neurotic,
right?
That kind of thing, more of a worrier, more of a insecure. Because I mean, I'm a person who's relatively secure in himself now, but there was many, many, many years where, and a lot, that I thought I was the biggest piece of shit on the planet. Right now she's a confident, bubbly 3-year-old who seems to own every room she's in, but who knows how long that's going to last. And I worry about that all the time.
Yeah.
I worry about how my relationship with my family is going to rub off on her, because it's not the best, and it's not the best relationship right now. I try to maintain it as best I can, but it's not the best relationship. And, I know that that's been an effect on other people in my family in the past. So yeah, I worry about it all the time, because her birth mother put her faith in us that we would be able to take care of her. And I want to make sure that I fulfill that promise, that fulfill that trust.
Do you try to shield her from, when those moments do come that you're feeling a little more down or a little anxious? And do you try to shield her from that? Because I know I do.
I think I do, but I'm sure my wife has told me when I've been a little short with her.
Yeah.
Because of other things that are affecting me. So as much as you think you're trying to shield it, I think that you maybe a person doesn't know how their voice is coming off or how their manner is coming off to other people.
Right.
So you may be projecting something you don't realize you're projecting. And on top of that, kids are very intuitive and very astute at even, at reading when mommy or daddy isn't at their best.
Yep. And it changes as they get older. I could tell you that. Like, it was much easier for me to shield things from my daughter when she was younger. And now I'm more focused on, rather than completely shielding her from things, I'm more focused on how can I explain this to her in a way that she'll understand and know that it's okay to feel these things sometimes.
Well, and the other issue there is that you're going to have to deal with her things as she gets older, and because those things are going to happen.
Right.
You one of the things that I think I've learned is that everybody's got something.
Yep.
So they're going to have to deal with something. How you handle that is going to be very critical. I think we're definitely a generation, whether it's Gen X or millennial parents, but we're definitely a generation that is more tuned into mental health and getting help for problems than previous generations were, which I think is good, but it's recognizing what is an issue and what is just growing up and being a preteen or a teenager.
Yeah.
That I think tends to be the most difficult part.
I think on the one hand, it's great that we are much more attuned to talking about and recognizing mental health issues. But on the other hand, we're also much more attuned to being in a society that fosters those things through social media and stuff like that. So, we keep climbing up the hill, but there's still a lot more to climb, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, look, I was just talking to you before we started this podcast about, an Instagram thing that I wasn't really sure, and now I'm, thinking of bringing my Instagram private because of something that happened that really wasn't even that but because I put pictures of my daughter on Instagram and some public Instagram, and it wasn't even that scary of an incident,
Right.
but it got me concerned enough where I'm like, well, maybe because we actually, maybe it wasn't a good idea to put her on a public profile like that. You know what I mean? It's like,
and now it's too late, right? Like
right.
For someone like me, who's since she was born, she's been on these platforms. My daughter's face has been on YouTube and Instagram
Right.
and Facebook. Now for me, like the cat's already out of the bag, so I can't put it back in at this point. For you, luckily, she's very young, so you could still do that.
Right, because by the time she puts up her own profile when she's 12 or whatever, hopefully not, she'll look different.
But how do I reconcile that, right? Like at this point, I think to myself, well, she's okay with it. She's happy with everything. Like she's fine. She likes being on YouTube and stuff like that. And she's not doing anything nefarious or bad. And that's fine. So, but now I have a second one, right? Who's only 2. So do I do it differently this time? That's what I keep asking myself. I don't know.
Here's the problem with that. You're not worried about how they're handling it. You're worried about how other people react to that and how they handle that reaction. And that's, it's a problem. It's, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't reveal too much about myself on social media. I don't. I talk about things, I know of people who have talked about family stuff and depression and things are going on with their marriages on social media. And I tend not to, only because, look, I'm talking about a public podcast about my depression.
Right.
But on social media, you get that immediate reaction.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the comments I got on those motherload essays I did.
Right.
They were driving me around the bend, and my editor kept telling me, just don't look at them, don't look at them. And I should have known from all those years of writing on the internet, not to look at the comments, but they were driving me around the bend because I was talking about my daughter.
Right.
And they were commenting directly on my parenting, and they were commenting directly on what I'm doing and not doing. And it was driving me crazy.
That was the first thing I told my mother when I knew that I was going to have a story up on the NewYorkTimes.com. The first thing I told my mom was, listen, don't read the comments, because I knew that she would not be able to handle it. Like for me, I'm very good at separating that stuff and just like, trolls are trolls, idiots are idiots. It's for something in me mentally, I can just shut that off. I could still read it and it doesn't bother me. But for a lot of people, you can't do that.
No, and I know that there's going to come a time when my daughter is going to see something on the internet and it's gonna see something related directly back to her on the internet, and it's gonna affect her.
Right.
And I'm not really sure at this point how to handle that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's going to be like when she's 13. A lot can change in 10 years.
I'm not sure if anybody knows.
Yeah. I mean, and I hear about cyberbullying, and I hear about how the level of bullying has gotten so much worse than when you were a kid or I was a kid. I went to school in the 70s and 80s. The bullying was your standard bullying.
Yep.
You got your head dunked in a toilet. You got yeah. beat up in the yard. You got, someone stole your lunch money. Maybe in my case, because I lived in a town with no Jews, I got called anti-Semitic names.
Yeah.
But that seems to be like nothing. That's the, buck up and it'll toughen you type of bullying, right?
Right.
What's going on now seems to be so much, 100 times worse.
Oh, I can't even imagine. I mean, when I get those notices from my daughter's school saying they practiced the shutdown drill today or a shelter in place, I'm happy that they're doing that, because then they're preparing the kids, but I hate the fact that they have to prepare the kids.
Well, and that's a whole other topic altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one thing that someone's taunting you on your Instagram or your Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's another where someone, obviously come in with a gun and shoot the school up.
Yeah. But they, there's a through line there, right? So sometimes those things lead to each other, and that's the problem.
Right. Exactly. And, you can no longer say, oh, buck up.
Right.
This will make you tougher.
Nope.
it's just not. It doesn't exist anymore
Nope.
because you can't escape it. If in pre-internet days you get bullied at school, you go hang out with your friends, you go home, you turn on GI Joe,
Yeah.
and you don't have to worry about it. But now it follows you home because you get on the computer, or if you're a teenager, you probably might have a phone by then, and you see it, and it's there, and you don't know how to deal with it because you are you have a your mind, you're not emotionally mature enough to deal with it yet. And
Yep.
it's just, I don't understand. I don't get how people, you can either turn out to be
Sure. The Parkland kids.
the Parkland school, right? Or you can roll into a ball and hide for high school, all of high school. And or even worse.
Yep.
And
It's scary that there's no in between now.
Right. And I'm not really sure what if my experience in life and how I operate now is going to help or hurt.
Yeah.
And that's the scariest part about raising a kid right now.
Yep. And I think we're learning every day to try to figure out ways to navigate it. But we're all making mistakes too, man.
Yeah, but you just try not to make an egregious mistake that that is going to so appreciably affect your child later on that they can't have a decent adulthood.
Yeah.
Without a lot of help. Sometimes you don't know if you're making that mistake, but I tend to think that if you don't acknowledge that something that you're doing isn't going to have a huge effect on your kid, then you're way too narcissistic to have an idea of how the world works.
Yeah, you've got to own up to it.
Yeah, and my parents made some very grave mistakes when I was a teenager or preteen, and they never owned up to any of those mistakes. None. My dad went to his grave thinking that he was fine. He did the right thing. And that's something that I hope not to do.
Well, you've learned from having to deal with the repercussions of it. So hopefully that will be the case. You'll be able to overcome that.
Not everyone does, though.
No. And that's why it's so important to try to get help, because somebody can usually help you navigate that.
Yeah.
What is something you do every day or every week? What's something you do to practice self-care and to make sure that you're taking care of yourself?
One of the things I try to do when everybody leaves, this is during the week, when everybody leaves for the day, my wife is left for work, my daughter's left for school, and it's quiet in the house, I just go in bed and just lie down. I don't even close my eyes. I just lie down. Maybe I'll turn on Kelly and Ryan or whoever she's co-hosting with her at the moment. So it's not like I'm singing in complete silence, but I'll just turn my brain off.
Yeah.
For about 45 minutes to an hour, and just lie there. And I know that's an hour where I could be working, or an hour I could be doing something productive.
But you're working on you.
Yeah, I have to do it. I have to do it, or else it's just constantly just being the gears running, and it doesn't, and it just makes me exhausted at the end of the day.
It sounds like it's almost like a form of meditation for you.
A little bit. Maybe I shouldn't use the TV as much, but
still, I mean, everybody needs to turn their brain off once in a while.
Yeah, something about watching Kelly Ripa makes me
turn your brain off.
Turn my brain off. God bless her. It's been that way for a long time now too. It's ever since I started working from home full time, that first hour has always been kind of for me. Obviously, since marriage and kids, it's even more important. Yeah. But albeit there are some days where that first hour extends to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. But when I'm really busy, most of the time that first hour, I need to just look. Even when I worked in an office, that first hour was spent getting coffee.
Yeah.
Blankly
chit
chat, blankly reading emails.
Yep.
And so, now that I'm working from home, that first hour, I don't have to do any of that stuff. So I just kind of lie in bed and just to shut it off for an hour. And if that helps me, I think.
That's good. I mean, I think that it's something that we all need, even if it's a meditation, if it's, listening to music, or in your case, watching Kelly Ripa. Yeah. Everyone's got to do something to take care of themselves. And
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily suggest Kelly Ripa as the cure. But, if she just happens to be on the TV, but sure. It's not a bad way of. It's not a bad way of just starting the day. And if your day starts at 10, so what?
Yep.
You're still more productive than if you try to just start pushing at 9, and then by 1 you're like mentally exhausted.
Yep.
So
I agree, man. Where can the listeners find you on the internet? Now, we just talked about how you're a pretty private guy, but I know you do have some social accounts out there that relate to your work and things.
I do have social accounts. I have a website that I haven't updated in forever, joelkeller.com. But you can also just, if you Google me, you'll either find the Canadian actor or me. But you'll see a lot of my work out there. I mean, I've written for places like the New York Times and VanityFair.com and Playboy.com and FastCompany.com and Decider.com is where a lot of my work is these days. Instagram is at joel.keller. You'll probably just end up seeing a lot of pictures of my daughter there, which may be, taken down soon.
Or
I don't know.
Maybe not. Yeah.
Maybe not. Twitter is at Joel Keller.
Well, there's plenty of your stuff out there for people to read.
Yeah.
You have been a stalwart over the past decade plus in this freelance game, writing about mostly TV and entertainment, but other things as well. Well, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate your being so candid and telling stories that you've never told before, and I think that the listeners will appreciate it as well. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Scott. I appreciate it.
Which leads me to this week's question of the week. Do you know someone in your family that has a history of mental illness? Or do you have a history of mental illness and your family knows about it or doesn't know about it? If they do know about it, when did you decide to tell them? Or when did they find out? And if they don't, why have you decided not to tell them? Why have you decided not to open up about it? Call us, leave us a message at 732-903-4441, or drop us an email. You could even email us a voice memo if that's easier for you at anxietydiariespodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed Anxiety Diaries, please rate the show on iTunes, leave a review, and spread the word about the podcast. Those things really do help. You can find the podcast at www.anxietydiariespodcast.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter as well. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Anxiety Diaries Podcast, where you'll be able to find all the show notes, links, and other things related to the show. We're also on Twitter at Anxiety Diary Pod. Thanks again for listening. Be well, and we'll see you next week.